For 10 years, Silas Vance and his beloved Alara had painstakingly built their life on the unforgiving edge of the Arizona territories. Their farm was humble, a patchwork of hard work and dreams, but every inch of it was carved out of sweat and an enduring love. Alara, with her kind eyes and a voice that could calm any storm within Silas's soul, was his entire world, his anchor, his purpose, a quiet haven amidst a turbulent world. They rarely ventured into the town of Redemption's End, preferring the solitude of their land. But it was the town, its simmering envy and hidden decay, that ultimately reached out its tendrils to grasp their fragile peace. Alara was falsely accused of stealing a valuable gold nugget from the wealthy and influential landowner, Jeremiah Thorne, whose word was practically law in Redemption's End. It was a lie, absurd and cruel, but in hungry times, people craved a scapegoat. The trial was a grotesque farce. Judge Elias Thorne, Jeremiah's cousin, presided with blatant prejudice, his gavel striking down truth with every rap. Testimonies were fabricated, witnesses intimidated into silence or outright lies. Silas fought like a cornered animal, roaring, pleading, desperate to prove his wife's innocence. But his words were drowned out by the chorus of accusations and the townspeople's fear-driven murmurs. The verdict was a foregone conclusion: guilty. Death by hanging. He couldn't save his wife from the hangman's noose, but he vowed to hang every last person who signed her death warrant. This is the brutal story of a man's relentless quest for vengeance in a world where justice had failed him. That day was seared into Silas's memory, a branding iron on his soul. Redemption's End's central square swelled with a jeering, morbid crowd. Alara stood on the gallows, her face pale but impossibly calm, her gaze searching, finding his. Silas, chained to a post at the edge of the mob, screamed, straining against his bonds, but two burly sheriff's deputies held him in an unyielding grip. Sheriff Brody, a man with a blank face and dull eyes, tightened the noose around Alara's neck with practiced efficiency. Jeremiah Thorne stood beside Judge Elias Thorne, their faces alight with smug satisfaction. In Sheriff Brody's hand, Silas managed to glimpse a rolled parchment, the execution warrant, signatures, many signatures, all those who had condemned his Alara. When the lever was pulled, the world for Silas Vance fractured into a million jagged pieces. He hadn't saved her. He had watched her die, and he had seen their faces, every last one, and he committed every signature on that cursed scroll to memory. His primal scream merged with the silent shadow that descended upon the town. Silas vanished. His farm stood deserted, a stark monument to injustice. No one bothered to look for him, assuming he had either taken his own life or fled far away, broken and beaten. But Silas had not fled. He retreated deep into the untamed wilderness, to places untouched by human footsteps. His sole companions were the twin specters of grief and rage, consuming him from within, burning like a perpetual fever. Revenge became his air, his water, his entire reason for existence. He lived like a phantom, honing his skills as a tracker, a hunter, a marksman. He learned to move without a sound, to read every sign in the earth, to blend seamlessly with the shadows. Weeks bled into months, months into years, each passing moment a sharpening of his resolve, a deepening of his cold, relentless purpose. 6 months later, a chilling whisper reached Nathan Blackwood, the sandstone jeweler who had testified against Alara, falsely claiming to have seen her with the stolen nugget. Blackwood was a small-time operator, a pathetic soul easily intimidated by the Thorns, seeking to curry favor. Silas tracked him to the outskirts of town, his pursuit methodical, patient. The night was moonless, an inky black canvas perfect for his grim task. Silas found Blackwood in his dimly lit shop, hunched over his counter, counting a meager stack of coins. "Remember Alara Vance?" Silas whispered from the darkness, his voice a rasp that carried the weight of the grave. Blackwood went rigid, his face draining of color. He recognized that voice, even after years. He began to tremble, his mind frantically scrambling for excuses. "She was guilty. I merely—" The words choked in his throat. Silas uttered not another sound. With chilling precision, he cinched a noose around Blackwood's neck, using the same type of rough hemp rope he glimpsed on the gallows. The jeweler twitched once, twice, his eyes bulging in horror. Then his body went limp, Silas left him hanging from a beam above the jewelry shop door, a macabre display for the morning light, with a terse note pinned to his chest. For Ilara, first signature. His hands were steady. His heart, an empty cavern, felt no tremor. The retribution had begun. The second victim was Arthur Finch, the prosecutor who, with a cynical glint in his eyes, had expertly woven the web of lies around Ilara. Finch was a vain man, fond of drink and boasting. Silas found him in a neighboring town, drowning his sorrows and telling crude anecdotes in a squalid saloon. Silas shadowed him back to his rented room. Finch, swaying drunkenly, fumbled with his key. "Who's there?" he slurred. Silas pushed the door open. It was a brief, brutal struggle. Finch tried to scream, but his mouth was quickly muffled. In the flickering light of a single kerosene lamp, Silas tightened the noose. The prosecutor thrashed, his eyes wide with a dawning terror and comprehension. Silas left him hanging from a bedroom ceiling beam. Beside him, another note. For Ilara, second signature. The town began to stir with fear. Eli Hayden, now a respected marshal in a different territory, heard whispers of these grim hangings and felt a cold prickle of recognition. The method was far too familiar. Silas continued his relentless hunt, systematically crossing names off his invisible ledger. Next was Judge Elias Thorne, who had presided over the unjust trial. Thorne, unnerved by the deaths of Blackwood and Finch, had barricaded himself in his sprawling estate, surrounding himself with heavily armed guards. But Silas moved like a ghost. He slipped into the estate under the shroud of a fierce thunderstorm night, using his seasoned tracking skills to bypass the sentries. In the judge's study, illuminated by the flickering lightning, Silas found him, cowering beneath his ornate desk. Thorne, trembling uncontrollably, begged for mercy. "I was only upholding the law," he stammered, spittle flying from his lips. "It was Jeremiah. He forced my hand." Silas listened in stoic silence, his face an impenetrable mask. Then, with the same cold resolve, he hanged the judge in his own library, amidst the very legal tomes he had so cynically desecrated. A note lay nearby, for Ilara, third signature. That very night, Silas dispatched a chilling message directly to Sheriff Brody. "You are next. I am coming for every signature." The town of Sandstone was gripped by absolute terror. No one felt safe. Wealthy citizens whose names might have been on that warrant huddled together, hiring new guards, their faces etched with paranoia. Sheriff Brody, comprehending the full gravity of the threat, barricaded himself in his office. Knowing Silas would come for him, he was merely a pawn in the Thorns' game, but his signature was there, indelible. Marshal Eli Hayden, now certain that these were the actions of Silas Vance, launched an aggressive investigation. His mandate was to capture Silas, yet he felt a strange, grim satisfaction that someone was delivering justice, however bloody the method. Silas, like a shadow of retribution, stalked Sheriff Brody. Brody tried to flee, to escape the town, but Silas intercepted him on the road leading out of Sandstone. The sheriff was armed, but his hands shook uncontrollably. "Why are you doing this?" he croaked, his voice cracking. "What did she ever do to you?" Silas replied, his voice dry as desert dust. "She was my wife. You killed her. You signed it." Brody attempted to draw his sidearm, but Silas was a blur of motion. He disarmed the sheriff with brutal efficiency. The sheriff pleaded for his life, promising anything. Silas looked at him without emotion, recalling the last agonizing moments of Ilara's life. Then he found a suitable tree, a note, for Ilara, fourth signature. Now only one remained. The grand puppeteer, Jeremiah Thorne, the most powerful man in Redemption's End, whose greed and ruthlessness had sent Ilara to the gallows. Thorne, knowing he was next, had sealed himself inside his mansion, transforming it into an impenetrable fortress. Dozens of hired guns patrolled its perimeter. He did not sleep, his eyes darting frantically, awaiting Silas. He was certain Silas could not break through, but Silas did not seek a direct confrontation. He spent days studying Thorne's estate, identifying its weak points, the guards' routines. He knew this would be his final act, the culmination of a decade of torment. He infiltrated the mansion under the cloak of night as most of the mercenaries lay in a drunken stupor, incapacitated by the whiskey Silas had tainted with a potent sedative. He bypassed the remaining alert sentries, using every shadow, every rustle of the wind to mask his presence. He found Jeremiah Thorne in his study, the man asleep at his desk, a revolver clutched in his hand, papers scattered before him. He was corpulent, arrogant, and now in his sleep, pale with a fear that transcended dreams. Silas stood directly before him. Thorne awoke with a gasp, his eyes widening in pure terror as he recognized his avenger. You're a madman, he rasped, struggling to speak. You wouldn't dare. The law, Silas's voice was cold as Arctic ice. The law killed my wife, and I am its executioner. He showed Thorne the faded execution warrant, which he had taken from Sheriff Brody. Your signature, Thorne. The first one? The most important one. Jeremiah Thorne lunged for his revolver, but Silas was faster, a blur of practiced movement. He disarmed him in an instant. Thorne thrashed, trying to break free, his eyes filled with desperate pleas and abject terror. Silas watched him, and in his own eyes there was no triumph, no joy, only in profound emptiness. He tightened the noose around Jeremiah Thorne's neck. Slowly, methodically, he saw in Thorne's eyes the same horror that had been in Alara's. This was the last signature. Justice had been served. The next day, when Jeremiah Thorne's body was discovered, Marshal Eli Hayden arrived at the mansion. He found Silas Vance sitting on the study floor, utterly spent, his weapons lying discarded beside him. I'm done, Silas said quietly, his voice hoarse. I've hanged every last one who signed. I did it for Alara. Eli looked at him. He saw not just a killer, but a man utterly broken by grief and obsession. He saw the devastating consequences of injustice. I have to arrest you, Silas, Eli said, his voice quiet, almost regretful. Silas simply nodded, offering no resistance. The trial was long and complex. Public opinion was sharply divided. Some saw Silas as a cold-blooded murderer, others as a folk avenger, a necessary evil. Testimonies about the Thornes' corruption, evidence of Alara's fabricated case, painstakingly gathered by Eli and Marshal McCabe, who had come to assist, surfaced. The court found Silas guilty of multiple homicides, but considering the extraordinary circumstances and the undeniable guilt of his victims, the sentence was lenient, life imprisonment, sparing him the gallows. It was a bitter triumph for all involved. Silas Vance spent the remainder of his life behind bars, but his name became a legend whispered across the West. A legend of a man who could not save his wife from the rope, but found the strength to hang every single person who had signed her death warrant. His story held no happiness, but it contained a terrible, undeniable truth. It inspired others to fight corruption, serving as a grim reminder that no injustice goes unpunished forever, and that even from the darkest depths of sorrow, a terrifying, bloody form of justice can be born.